Welcome back to the channel, Coin Hunters. Today, we're uncovering the top 3 most valuable Washington $quarter coins that could be worth far more than their 25-cent face value. Some rare dates, mint marks, unusual varieties, and exceptional conditions have brought thousands, and even more than $100,000 at auction. So before you spend that old quarter, stop and check the date, mint mark, and condition. You might be holding a coin that serious collectors are searching for and willing to pay big money to own. Stay with us, because number 1 could be the most exciting coin of them all. Let's begin first up the dated 1965, carrying no mint mark and shown in circulated condition. At first glance, this coin may look like an ordinary old quarter that has spent decades passing from one person to another. But 1965 is a very important year in the history of American coinage, because it marks the beginning of the new copper-nickel-clad quarter era after the United States moved away from the traditional silver composition. So, if you have a 1965 Washington quarter in an old collection, coin jar, inherited box, or even loose change, don't ignore it before checking its important details. There is also an important point that many collectors misunderstand. A 1965 quarter without a mint mark is not automatically a rare or extremely valuable coin. In fact, the regular 1965 issue was produced in very large numbers. However, certain varieties, exceptional grades, unusual errors, and especially special mint set examples can be much more collectible. The difference between an ordinary circulated example and a rare, high-grade or unusual example can be dramatic in the collector market. The Washington quarter has a long and fascinating history in United States coinage. The design featuring George Washington was introduced in 1932 to commemorate the 200th anniversary of Washington's birth. John Flanagan created the famous Washington portrait and a reverse design featuring an eagle. For decades, Washington quarters were struck in a 90% silver and 10% copper composition. That changed dramatically in the middle of the 1960s. By 1965, the rising price of silver had created a major problem for American circulating coinage. The United States Mint began replacing the traditional silver composition in quarters and dimes with a copper-nickel-clad composition. The 1965 Washington quarter became one of the first major circulating examples of this new era. The regular 1965 quarter has copper-nickel outer layers over a copper core and weighs approximately 5.67 grams, with a diameter of about 24.3 millimeters and a reeded edge. Another fascinating detail is the missing mint mark. Many collectors see a 1965 quarter without a mint mark and immediately think it must be a Philadelphia coin. The situation is more complicated. During this period, the mint suspended mint marks as part of the effort to discourage coin collecting and hoarding. Regular 1965 quarters were produced without mint marks, and the no mint mark feature therefore does not, by itself, make the coin rare. The Philadelphia regular issue had a reported mintage of approximately 1.82 billion pieces, making the normal circulated 1965 quarter a common coin rather than a scarce rarity. At the same time, San Francisco also produced a much smaller number of 1965 special mint set quarters without mint marks. PCGS reports approximately 2.36 million of these SMS quarters, and they can show sharper details and more proof-like surfaces than normal circulation strikes. Now let's examine the features that make this coin interesting. On the obverse, you will see the familiar portrait of George Washington facing left, with the word Liberty above him and the date 1965 below. The inscription "In God We Trust" appears on either side of the portrait. On the reverse is the heraldic eagle, surrounded by inscriptions including United States of America, E Pluribus Unum, and quarter dollar. One of the most important features is the composition. Unlike Washington quarters dated 1964 and earlier, the regular 1965 circulation quarter is not a 90% silver quarter. It is a copper-nickel-clad coin with a copper center. This distinction is extremely important because someone finding a 1965 quarter should not automatically assume that it contains silver simply because of its age. The edge can also tell an interesting story. A normal clad quarter should show the characteristic copper-colored core between the outer layers when viewed carefully from the edge. Collectors sometimes use the weight and edge appearance as preliminary checks when investigating unusual pieces. A normal 1965 clad quarter weighs about 5.67 grams. If a supposed 1965 quarter has a substantially different weight or an unusual edge appearance, it may deserve closer examination by an experienced numismatist or professional grading service. The no mint mark feature is another historical characteristic. From 1965 through 1967, circulating Washington quarters were made without mint marks, so the absence of a mint mark is normal for this period. This is why collectors should never assume that every 1965 no mint mark quarter is a rare Philadelphia error. When discussing rarity, we need to separate an ordinary circulated 1965 quarter from an exceptional example. The normal circulated coin is not considered rare because more than 1.8 billion regular pieces were produced. Many examples have survived, which keeps the value of ordinary circulated coins relatively modest. However, condition can completely change the story. A circulated quarter with scratches, contact marks, worn lettering, dull surfaces, and heavy signs of use generally has limited numismatic premium. A sharply preserved coin with original luster, strong details, and minimal contact marks can attract much more attention from collectors. PCGS notes that collector-grade examples generally begin around MS65 and that superb gem examples become increasingly difficult to find. There is another fascinating category, the 1965 Special Mint Set Quarter. These coins also have no mint mark, but they were produced specifically for special mint sets rather than ordinary circulation. They can have sharper details and more reflective surfaces, and modern grading services identify them separately from ordinary business strikes. High-grade SMS pieces can bring significant premiums. For example, a 1965 SMS quarter-graded PCGS SP68 Plus has sold for $1,181.25 in a Great Collections auction. Varieties can also matter. PCGS identifies double-die varieties among 1965 Washington quarters, meaning collectors should carefully examine the lettering and design details rather than simply judging a coin by its date and mint mark. A genuine, professionally attributed variety can be considerably more interesting than a normal example. Now comes the question that every collector wants answered: how much could a 1965 Washington quarter without a mint mark actually be worth? For a normal circulated example, the realistic answer is usually modest. NGC's current guide lists circulated 1965 quarters around 30 cents to 85 cents depending on grade, while PCGS notes that circulated examples may trade around a couple of dollars in some open market circumstances. Actual selling prices can vary based on eye appeal, certification, variety, seller, buyer demand, and the marketplace. But the situation changes when we move into exceptional grades. NGC's current guide shows substantially higher figures for very high-grade examples, including $30 at MS66, $100 at MS67, $900 at MS68, and a much higher listed figure at the extreme top end. These are guide values and should not be interpreted as a guaranteed selling price for every coin. Auction history demonstrates just how wide the range can become. PCGS reports an auction record of $12,650 for a 1965 Washington quarter, recorded in a stack sale in January 2005. That result represents an exceptional coin and should not be used as the expected value of an ordinary circulated quarter. This is the most important lesson for viewers. A headline such as, $12,650 Washington quarter, does not mean that every 1965 quarter without a mint mark is worth thousands of dollars. The highest prices are associated with exceptional condition, special characteristics, varieties, or particular auction circumstances. A normal circulated 1965 quarter can still be a wonderful historical collectible, but it should not automatically be valued at a five-figure price. If you have a 1965 Washington quarter, start by checking the date and confirming that the coin really is dated 1965. Next, inspect the entire surface under good lighting. Look carefully at Washington's portrait, Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, the date, the eagle, the lettering, and the overall sharpness of the design. Pay particular attention to unusual doubling, die characteristics, striking problems, or anything that looks different from a normal 1965 quarter. Do not clean the coin. Cleaning can damage the original surface and may reduce collector interest. A coin with natural age and circulation marks is usually more desirable than a coin that has been aggressively polished. The edge and weight can also be useful clues when something appears unusual. A normal clad 1965 quarter should be approximately 5.67 grams. If your coin has a significantly different weight or an unusual metallic appearance, don't immediately assume that it is valuable. Instead, have the piece examined by a reputable coin dealer or professional grading service. Collectors should also learn the difference between a normal business strike and a special mint set coin. A no-mint mark 1965 quarter can belong to either context, and the surfaces and strike characteristics may provide clues. Professional certification can be especially useful when a coin appears to be an exceptional grade or a significant variety. Most importantly, never let an attractive internet headline convince you that every old coin is automatically worth thousands or millions of dollars. Coin values depend on authentication, grade, rarity, variety, preservation, and real market demand. Auction records are useful evidence, but the price of one exceptional coin does not establish the value of every example. So, the 1965 United States Washington quarter dollar without a mint mark is a fascinating piece of American numismatic history. It represents the transition from traditional silver coinage to the new copper-nickel clad era, and its missing mint mark is historically normal rather than automatically an error. With a regular mintage of roughly 1.82 billion pieces, an ordinary circulated example is generally common and normally worth only a modest amount above, or sometimes around, its face value depending on the market and grade. But don't stop there. The real excitement begins when you discover something unusual, an exceptionally preserved coin, a genuine double die variety, a remarkable error, or a special mint set example with outstanding surfaces. Those are the situations where a seemingly ordinary 1965 quarter can become much more interesting to serious collectors and potentially command a substantial auction premium. Exceptional auction results prove that the right coin can bring dramatically more than its face value, but those results are the exception, not the rule. So, before you spend or discard that old 1965 Washington quarter, take a second look. Check the date, examine the surfaces, study the design, inspect the edge, and compare the coin with verified examples. You may not have a fortune in your hand, but you could have a fascinating piece of United States history, and if you discover a truly unusual example, that's when the story can become very exciting. Next up, the coin number 2, the 1979, featuring the D mint mark and appearing in good circulated condition. This quarter may look like an ordinary piece of pocket change, but the story behind the 1979 D Washington quarter is much more interesting when we examine its history, production, condition, varieties, and collector market. And while a normal circulated example is generally not a rare fortune, exceptional examples can bring surprisingly strong prices at auction. PCGS records a $1,078 auction result for a 1979 D quarter graded MS-67, while Great Collections has recorded an even higher $5,175 result for an MS-68 example. So, if you have a 1979 Washington quarter with a small d below the eagle on the reverse, don't judge it only by its worn appearance. Take a closer look, because the difference between an ordinary circulated coin and an extraordinary high-grade example can be enormous in the collector market. The Washington quarter has been one of America's most recognizable coins for generations. The design was introduced in 1932 to honor George Washington, the first president of the United States. John Flanagan created the original Washington portrait, and the reverse features a heraldic eagle. By 1979, the design had already been circulating for decades, but the coin was very different from the silver Washington quarters of the earlier era. The 1979 D quarter was struck at the Denver Mint, identified by the letter D on the reverse. It was made from copper-nickel clad material rather than the 90% silver composition used on Washington quarters dated 1964 and earlier. The standard specifications are approximately 5.67 grams in weight, 24.3 millimeters in diameter, and a reeded edge. The year 1979 was also an important period in American coin production. The United States was producing enormous quantities of coins for everyday commerce, and the Washington quarter was heavily used in vending machines, transportation, stores, and ordinary daily transactions. The 1979 D issue had a reported mintage of 489,789,780 pieces, meaning that the date itself is not scarce. That huge production figure is important when discussing rarity. A 1979 D quarter should not automatically be called a rare coin simply because it is old or because it carries a D mint mark. The real collecting opportunity comes from condition, unusual varieties, errors, and exceptionally preserved specimens. Let's begin with the obverse. The front of the coin displays the familiar portrait of George Washington facing left. Above his head is Liberty, while the date 1979 appears at the bottom. "In God We Trust" is positioned around the portrait. Even after decades of circulation, these design elements can help collectors determine the amount of wear on a particular specimen. Turn the coin over and you will see the famous eagle on the reverse. United States of America appears around the upper portion, with E pluribus unum above the eagle and quarter dollar below. The most important feature for today's coin is the small D mint mark, which identifies Denver as the production facility. The 1979 D quarter is composed of copper nickel clad over a pure copper center. It has a reeded edge and a standard weight of approximately 5.67 grams. One useful detail is the edge. Because this is a clad quarter, a collector examining the edge may see the copper-colored core between the outer layers. This can help distinguish it from the older silver Washington quarters. However, appearance alone should never be used to authenticate an unusual coin. If the weight, color, or construction seems dramatically different, professional examination is the safest approach. Another interesting feature is the famous Washington quarter design itself. The 1979 D belongs to the 1965 to 1998 Washington quarter series, and collectors often build complete date and mintmark collections from this period. That means even a common date can have a place in a serious collection, especially when the coin is unusually well preserved. Now we reach the most important question: is the 1979 D Washington quarter rare? The normal circulated 1979 D quarter is not considered rare. With nearly 490 million pieces struck at Denver, plenty of examples survived. PCGS's rarity information also classifies the regular issue as common overall. But coin collecting is not simply about how many coins were originally produced. Condition can make an enormous difference. Most quarters were placed into circulation, where they encountered pockets, cash registers, vending machines, drawers, and countless other surfaces. As a result, truly pristine examples are much harder to locate than ordinary circulated pieces. This is where the 1979 D becomes interesting. A good condition circulated quarter generally has considerable wear, small scratches, contact marks, and loss of original mint luster. A coin that remained untouched after leaving the mint can look dramatically different. Collectors searching for high-grade Washington quarters compete for pieces with strong strikes, clean surfaces, attractive luster, and minimal marks. The auction record tells the story. PCGS reports that a 1979 D Washington quarter graded MS-67 sold for $1,078 at Great Collections on August 17, 2014. Great Collections also reports a 1979 D MS-68 example selling for $5,175, demonstrating just how dramatically the market can change when an extremely high-grade specimen is involved. That does not mean your circulated 1979 D quarter is worth thousands of dollars. It means that the market can pay extraordinary premiums for exceptional examples. The condition is the key. Now let's talk about realistic values. According to the NGC Price Guide, as of July 2026, a 1979 D Washington quarter in circulated condition is generally listed around 30 cents to 85 cents, depending on grade. NGC also notes that pristine uncirculated examples can reach much higher levels, with some examples approaching hundreds of dollars. For a normal good condition circulated coin like the one described in this video, you should therefore not expect a 4-figure or 5-figure price. A realistic market value may remain close to face value, depending on its exact condition and the buyer. But once we move into uncirculated grades, the story changes. PCGS lists an auction record of $1,078 for MS67, while Great Collections reports a spectacular $5,175 sale for an MS68 specimen. These auction records give us an important lesson. The value of a coin isn't determined only by its date. Two coins carrying exactly the same 1979 D date and mint mark can have dramatically different values because their preservation is different. A circulated example may be worth less than $1, while a professionally graded top condition example can bring hundreds or even thousands of dollars. That is why collectors pay such close attention to grading. There is also a broader market for unusual errors and varieties. A 1979 D quarter showing a genuine minting error could be worth considerably more than a normal example, depending on the type and severity of the error. However, damage that happened after the coin left the mint should not be confused with a genuine mint error. If you find a 1979 D Washington quarter, the first thing you should do is carefully inspect the date and mint mark. Make sure the small d is actually present beneath the eagle. Then examine both sides of the coin under strong, natural or neutral lighting. Look at Washington's hair, cheek, jaw, and surrounding lettering. On the reverse, inspect the eagle, lettering, stars, and rim. A heavily worn coin will show flattened details, while a high-grade coin should retain sharp design elements and original mint luster. Do not clean the coin. This is extremely important. Scrubbing, polishing, chemicals, or abrasive materials can permanently damage the surface and reduce its collector appeal. A naturally circulated coin with honest wear is usually preferable to a cleaned coin that has been artificially brightened. If the coin appears unusually sharp despite having been stored loose, examine it carefully for contact marks. Even a tiny scratch can prevent a coin from receiving a very high grade. This is one reason why seemingly ordinary coins sometimes become valuable after professional grading. You can also check the weight. A normal 1979 D quarter should weigh approximately 5.67 grams. If your coin has a significantly different weight, unusual thickness, or strange edge construction, it may deserve further investigation. Most importantly, don't confuse ordinary damage with a mint error. Scratches, dents, discoloration, corrosion, and damage from machinery or circulation generally occurred after the coin was produced. A genuine mint error must be connected to the manufacturing process. If you believe you have an exceptional specimen, compare it with certified examples and consider professional authentication. A reputable grading service can determine whether the coin is genuinely unusual and assign a standardized grade. So, what is the story of the 1979 D Washington quarter? It is a fascinating example of modern American coinage, struck at the Denver Mint during a period of enormous coin production. With nearly 490 million pieces produced, the ordinary circulated 1979 D quarter is common rather than rare. A good condition example will normally have only a modest value, and collectors should not assume that every 1979 D quarter is a hidden fortune. But there is another side to this coin. When exceptional preservation enters the picture, the value can rise dramatically. Verified auction records include $1,078 for an MS67 and $5,175 for an MS68 example. These results show why experienced collectors never judge a coin only by its age or face value. So, if you have a 1979 D Washington quarter in your collection, take a moment before spending it. Check the condition, inspect the details, study the edge, look for unusual characteristics, and compare it with authenticated examples. Your circulated quarter may simply be worth a small premium, but an exceptionally preserved or genuinely unusual specimen could be much more interesting to the collector market. And remember, the biggest values belong to exceptional coins, not ordinary circulated examples. Always verify an impressive price against actual auction records, professional grading information, and the exact condition of your coin. Next up, the last and final coin, the dated 1970, with no mint mark, in very fine condition. At first glance, this quarter may look like an ordinary old coin that has simply spent decades in circulation. But the 1970 Washington quarter has several interesting characteristics that make it worth examining carefully, especially when we consider its history, production, condition, varieties, errors, and auction market potential. Before we get too excited about the possibility of a huge price, there is one important fact every collector should understand. A normal 1970 quarter without a mint mark is not automatically a rare or extremely valuable coin. The Philadelphia Mint produced about 136,420,000 examples, so ordinary circulated pieces are relatively common. However, certain varieties, mint errors, and exceptionally high-grade specimens can be much more desirable. Verified auction records show that exceptional 1970 quarters can bring hundreds of dollars, while dramatic error examples can command even more. So, if you have a 1970 Washington quarter without a mint mark, don't simply look at the face value and put it aside. Take a closer look, because the details can tell you whether you have an ordinary circulated quarter or something much more interesting. The Washington quarter is one of the most recognizable coins in American history. The design was introduced in 1932 to honor George Washington, the first president of the United States. John Flanagan created the famous portrait used on the obverse, while the reverse features a powerful heraldic eagle surrounded by inscriptions. For decades, Washington quarters were made from 90% silver and 10% copper. That changed in 1965, when the United States Mint introduced copper nickel-clad quarters because rising silver prices were creating serious problems for circulating coinage. The 1970 quarter therefore belongs to the modern clad era rather than the traditional silver era. NGC lists the standard composition as copper nickel clad over a copper core, with a weight of approximately 5.67 grams and a diameter of 24.3 millimeters. The absence of a mint mark on the 1970 quarter is also important. This is a Philadelphia Mint issue, and the no mint mark feature is normal. It should not automatically be considered a minting error. The Philadelphia issue had a mintage of approximately 136.42 million pieces, while Denver produced more than 417 million 1970 D quarters. This makes the 1970 no mint mark quarter particularly interesting from a historical perspective. It comes from a period when the United States was transitioning into modern clad coinage, while the familiar Washington design continued to appear on coins used every day across America. Let's begin with the obverse. The front of the coin shows George Washington facing left. The word Liberty appears above his portrait, the date 1970 is positioned below, and "In God We Trust" appears around the portrait. These details are especially useful when evaluating a circulated example because the amount of wear on Washington's hair, cheek, jaw, and surrounding lettering can help determine the coin's grade. On the reverse, you will find the famous eagle with United States of America above it, E pluribus unum above the eagle, and quarter dollar below. The edge is reeded, and the standard coin weighs approximately 5.67 grams. One of the most important features is the composition. A normal 1970 quarter is not a 90% silver quarter. It is a copper nickel-clad coin with a copper center. This means that finding a 1970 date does not mean you have found an old silver quarter. The no mint mark is another important feature. On a normal 1970 Philadelphia quarter, the absence of a mint mark is expected. Therefore, collectors should not automatically advertise a 1970 no mint mark quarter as a rare error simply because there is no letter beneath the eagle. However, there is something much more interesting to investigate: varieties and errors. The 1970 Washington quarter series includes recognized double die varieties, and there are also known examples struck on incorrect planchets or incorrect stock. These unusual pieces are where the potential for much stronger collector premiums can appear. Now let's discuss rarity. If your 1970 Washington quarter without a mint mark is genuinely in very fine circulated condition, the coin itself is not considered a major rarity. More than 136 million were produced at Philadelphia, and many examples survived. The normal circulated coin therefore has limited scarcity. But collectors don't look only at the number of coins originally produced. They also consider condition and survival. Millions of quarters entered everyday circulation, where they were exposed to scratches, dents, contact marks, dirt, pocket wear, and other forms of damage. Over the decades, most examples lost their original mint luster. A very fine coin is still an attractive collectible because it retains a substantial amount of its original design detail. Washington's portrait remains recognizable, lettering is generally readable, and the major elements of the reverse remain visible. But it is still a circulated coin, meaning it is very different from a pristine mint state specimen. This difference becomes extremely important at the upper end of the market. PCGS notes that high-grade 1970 quarters become significantly scarcer as the grade increases. An ordinary circulated example and a superb uncirculated example may look like completely different levels of collectability. There is also serious collector interest in genuine varieties and mint errors. For example, the 1970D issue has recognized double-die varieties and striking errors, showing why collectors carefully examine these coins rather than judging them solely by their date. For a 1970 no-mint mark quarter, the biggest opportunity is therefore not the absence of the mint mark itself. The opportunity comes from discovering something genuinely unusual, especially an authenticated variety, major mint error, or exceptionally high grade. Now let's get to the question everyone wants answered: how much could a 1970 Washington quarter without a mint mark be worth? For a normal circulated 1970 Philadelphia quarter, the value is generally modest. Current market guides show circulated examples around the face value range, while higher grade uncirculated coins can bring premiums. USA Coin Book lists the 1970 Philadelphia issue as a common clad quarter with an estimated value of around $12 or more in uncirculated mint state condition, while circulated examples generally have much lower market value. For a coin specifically described as very fine, you should therefore not expect a price of thousands of dollars simply because it is dated 1970. A normal VF example will generally be worth only a modest premium, and the exact amount depends on eye appeal, surface quality, buyer demand, and the marketplace. But now comes the exciting part. Exceptional examples can sell for dramatically more. PCGS records a $875.38 auction sale for a 1970 Washington quarter graded MS-67, sold by Heritage Auctions in January 2014. That is a perfect example of why condition matters. A normal circulated quarter and a professionally graded MS-67 coin may carry exactly the same date, yet their market values can be hundreds of dollars apart. The story becomes even more interesting when we consider error coins. Recent auction records include a 1970D quarter struck on dime thickness stock that sold for $120, a 1970D quarter struck on a 5-cent planchet that sold for $396, and another struck on 10-cent stock that sold for $408. These are specialized mint errors, not ordinary circulated quarters. So if someone tells you that every 1970 no-mint mark quarter is worth hundreds or thousands of dollars, be careful. The big numbers belong to specific exceptional coins, not the average circulated example. If you have a 1970 Washington quarter without a mint mark, begin by examining the date and confirming that the coin is actually from 1970. Then inspect both sides under good lighting. Look closely at the portrait of Washington. Examine the hair, cheek, jaw, lettering, and date for signs of unusual doubling or other characteristics. Then turn the coin over and carefully inspect the eagle, lettering, stars, rim, and inscriptions. Pay special attention to anything that appears doubled, unusually shaped, unusually thin, or different from a normal quarter. However, remember that many apparent errors are actually caused by damage after the coin left the mint. Scratches, dents, machine damage, corrosion, and environmental damage should not automatically be called mint errors. The weight can also provide a useful clue. A normal 1970 clad quarter should weigh approximately 5.67 grams. If your coin is significantly lighter or heavier, that doesn't automatically mean it is valuable, but it may justify additional research. The edge should also be examined. A normal clad quarter has a copper core between its outer layers. If the edge looks dramatically different, or if the coin seems unusually thin, don't clean or alter it. Preserve it exactly as you found it and seek professional evaluation. Never polish a potentially valuable coin. Cleaning can leave scratches and unnatural surfaces that reduce collector appeal. Even if your coin is dirty or dark, its original surface may be more valuable to collectors than a bright, artificially cleaned appearance. If you believe you have discovered a genuine double die, wrong planchet error, off metal strike, or another unusual mint error, professional authentication is strongly recommended. A reputable grading service can help determine whether the feature is a genuine mint-made characteristic or simply post-mint damage. So, what is the real story behind the 1970 United States Washington quarter dollar without a mint mark in very fine condition? It is an interesting coin from an important period in American coinage, but an ordinary circulated example is not automatically rare. The Philadelphia Mint produced approximately 136.42 million pieces, and the no mint mark appearance is normal for the issue. For a normal very fine example, the realistic value is generally modest rather than thousands of dollars. But that doesn't mean you should ignore the coin. The real excitement begins when you discover something unusual, such as a recognized variety, genuine mint error, or exceptionally high-grade specimen. The auction market proves that exceptional 1970 Washington quarters can be valuable. One MS-67 example brought $875.38, demonstrating how dramatically condition can affect the market. And specialized mint errors from the 1970 era have also achieved several $100 results. So before you spend that old 1970 quarter, stop and inspect it. Look at the date, study the design, examine the surfaces, check the weight, inspect the edge, and search for genuine varieties or mint-made errors. Your particular coin may simply be a common circulated quarter, but careful examination is exactly how collectors discover the unusual pieces. And remember, the biggest auction prices are reserved for exceptional coins. A spectacular auction result should never be treated as the guaranteed value of every coin with the same date. The exact condition, authenticity, variety, error, and professional grade all matter. If you enjoyed this journey into the world of United States rare coins, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep watching for more Washington quarters, Lincoln pennies, Jefferson nickels, Roosevelt dimes, and other fascinating American coins. There could be an interesting coin sitting unnoticed in your collection right now. Thanks for watching, and happy coin hunting.